Hello and welcome. My name is BirdyBot, and today I've got kind of a funny video for you. I think I'm going to call this Storytime with BirdyBot. But basically what this video is going to be is a retelling of a D&D one-off campaign. For those of you that don't know what D&D is, it's a imaginary tabletop role-playing game where you and your friends all get together and sit around a table and tell stories together, like a collaborative story game. Many of you may not or may know this, I love D&D. I play it all the time. I have 3 different groups. 2 of them, I'm the DM for children, which is hilarious. Probably as hilarious as you can imagine it. But last night was the first night that I got to DM for my adult group of friends. We all get together usually on Fridays. I was thinking this video would be a retelling of that story. I haven't really thought this through. I'm probably going to put some footage up for those of you that are very visually stimulated or need that visual stimulation. I'll probably put Modern Millinaire up, just me playing around. But I'll leave a link in the description below if you're like really intrigued by Modern Millinaire. But if you're anything like me and you usually put up a video to help you distract you while you fall asleep, this is probably the video for you. All I need from you is your imaginations while I retell this story. So as I'm telling it, you just think as hard as you can about what these places look like, what these characters look like. I'll try to be as descriptive as possible, especially for those of you who've never played the game. And listen, if this video is not for you, that is totally okay. I don't mind. It's a weird one-off. And you're probably noticing now that I'm starting to like sink into this southern drawl because in fact, this one-off campaign was Western themed. So that's what's going on. Anyways, it's going to be a long video, and I should put a disclaimer in that there are some adult themes. I was playing with adults, or as much as you can call them adults, my friends. So if there's anything that makes you sensitive about like sexuality or gore, those themes are in here. It is unfortunately set in a brothel for those of you that don't like that sort of thing. But let's just launch into this. It's an experiment. So travel with me and I'll retell the story of Bedlam. Bedlam is a town on the edge of civilization. Deserts are every way you look. Standing on the main street when there's only one, all you see are shanty wooden buildings lining the street, and there's sand everywhere. Back in the day, Bedlam used to be a gold prospecting town, but ever since the gold dried up, very few people stayed, and most of the buildings are abandoned. Well, one of the buildings is actually rocking. You can hear music playing from inside, like from an old piano that's terribly out of tune. It's Mama's Harlottery. And when you push open the saloon doors, there is Mama. Now, Mama is the biggest tiefling you've ever seen. For those of you who don't play D&D, tieflings are half human, half fiends. And this particular fiend is corpulent. She's a big woman. She has red skin of her tiefling race, big horns coming out of her coiffed hair, which is coiled and wrapped up, black and shining, with a little red lace top hat on. She's wearing this getup. It's like a corset with red and black lace all over it. And she's a buxom woman. She's big, and her arm fat flaps as she gesticulates wildly. And she's got those nice long black talons of her tiefling race. And she is just a peach. She runs the Harlottery here. Of course, it's her namesake. She greets everyone at the door with big smiles and warm southern charm. She's a real woman, this Mama. Now, in Mama's Harlottery, there happens to be quite a few people. This is the only place in town where there's a good drink and good company. Lots of ladies are already working their working for their keep, and Mama's making sure everyone's well watered, so to speak. Now, the playable characters of this campaign include Billy Two Pint, who is God forbid, one of the few people in this bar who was born in Bedlam. Not too many people stay, but Billy Two Pint, well, he stayed. Billy Two Pint has about 10 teeth in his head. He's got an old hog that he rides, that's his mount, called Old Hoss. And Billy Two Pint's called Billy Two Pint because when his mama bore him, when she was giving birth, she yelled out, "Get me 2 pints!" And so that's why he's called Billy Two Pint. So he's hanging out with some of his sisters who happen to work at Mama's Harlottery. But over brooding in one of the corners is Father John Landis. He's a human as well. He is a massively tall man. He's a preacher. You can tell just by his clothing. He's wearing a top hat with a little priest collar. And his armor, his robe is seeming to cover some extensive plate mail. Although you don't really know that until he walks around all 400 pounds of him and his footsteps fall heavily on the ground. And he's looking at everybody at the bar and is essentially disgusted by the amount of sin that he sees there. He speaks with a low, gravelly voice. As well, we've got a half-orc wallflowering in the corner. He's not really talking to anybody. He's not looking at anybody. And he's sipping his drink. He's got a big hank of black hair hanging over his face. If you don't catch it already, he's quite an emo character. He doesn't really fit in, and he's not talking to anybody, and no one really wants to talk to him. His name's Harlow. Finally, we've got a dandy working the ladies. It's another tiefling, this one gorgeously handsome, carrying with him a fiddle, and he is all smiles and charm, but he's got a little bit of sleight of hand going on as he's like working the room, finding out who's distracted enough to steal from. This is Lucius the tiefling, and he's quite the devil. Finally, we've got 2 PCs sitting together. Heffenveit, the brewer dwarf, who is drinking and telling a story. And we've got Ander, the halfling, who is distrustfully looking at anyone taller than him. He hates humans. He hates people who are taller. He's got a real Napoleonic complex going on. Anyways, Mama's working the room. This big tiefling. She's coming over and just making sure everyone's having a good time. That's how she talks. One figure sitting by himself with a big black cowl over top of his nose and mouth so you can't see his face. And he's got a black hat over top, so really the slit of his eyes is visible. He's completely covered head to toe in cloth. And he's sitting by himself with an undrank cup of whiskey. And he's been staring at that whiskey, occasionally lifting it to his cowl. I mean, he looks like he might be smelling the whiskey, but he always puts it back down on the table. And Mama's eyeing him suspiciously. At this moment, Father John Landis, all 400 pounds of this preacher, decides that he wants to investigate the man sitting at the bar. Because Father Landis has a pretty good idea of what a sinner looks like. And that, to him, is what a sinner looks like. So he struts on over, sits down beside this fellow, and begins to ask some questions. "Are you a sinner?" says the father to the man in black. The man in black, you can see his eyelids flicker just a little bit, but he doesn't turn his face to look at the preacher before he says, "We're all sinners." The father narrows his eyes, but Mama sidles over. She was just cleaning a glass with some spit and a rag, and she says, Father, I don't think you want to trouble this man. He's been sitting here for 6 months, and he's a real stump in the mud. And the father really doesn't like the look of this guy. And actually, he can start to smell something coming off of this man. It's the smell of decay. Finally, the father says, "What are you doing here?" And the man turns to face him. And at this point, the player is doing some pretty frantic rolling of insight and nature, and he notices not only that the man's eyes, of what he can see of this man's face, his skin is gray, and his eyes should be sightless. They're completely cataract. They seem like they're looking right through him. And the preacher notices that his cowl doesn't move. There's no breath coming from this man. The preacher's doing some rolling to see what the hell is this guy, and he channels divinity in a sense, asks his god, and his god informs him that this is a Revenant. Now, for those of you who don't play D&D, a Revenant is a special type of undead. It is essentially a revenge zombie. It's a person that has been killed and who has a serious need for vengeance. So serious that they actually come back from the dead at any time that they can sense their prey. No matter how far away they are, they always know where their prey is. And the only way that they can be released from the mortal coil is by killing that prey with their own bare hands. They have a year to do it before their body decays completely. And the preacher knows this based on his own religion checks. He also checks to see, is this a righteous man? And sure enough, he feels a little bit of contentment as his god informs it that this in fact is a righteous, decaying zombie, revenge zombie in front of him. The preacher asks, "Who are you, stranger?" And the Revenant replies, "My name's Flint Eastwood." Get what I did there? Flint Eastwood. I'm patting myself on the back right now. You can't see it. Anyways, Flint begins to tell his tale. Way back in the day, when Flint was a man and not a zombie, a Revenant, he had a daughter and a beautiful wife. Flint had to go off to the war. You know, the war. The war. And while he was gone, an inventor gnome named Ozymandias had been developing a new experimental stagecoach. That's what we're going to call it for now. And one day during testing had run that stagecoach, that experimental stagecoach, through Flint's ranch, killing both his wife and his daughter and destroying the ranch, all the cattle scattered away. And by the time Flint came home, that place was completely destroyed. There was nothing left. Now, Flint's out for revenge. So inevitably, the preacher asks, "Well, why haven't you done it yet?" And Flint replies, "It's just too hard. There's the Ozymandias, this little inventor gnome, has several inventions that keep him safe, including steel golems, which if you know your D&D, those are some pretty intense creatures. Pretty tough for level 3 characters to get through. But perhaps if Flint had a group of allies, he'd be able to take down Ozymandias and finally let his immortal soul rest in the wind." The preacher likes this story, but is still distrustful when all of a sudden Lucius comes over, playing a tune on his fiddle. This is the tiefling who's dressed like a dandy. And he's playing subtly. He's playing a charm called Calm Emotions from his fiddle. People are starting to feel a little bit peaceful as he plays it, and he sidles over. The preacher really doesn't like the look of this tiefling. I mean, that's a devil dancing by the pale moonlight to him. And they have a bit of a conversation, a bit of a confrontation. But luckily, that tiefling's got super high charisma and is able to dissuade the preacher from teaching him a little thing about sin or two. The tiefling, Lucius, is intrigued by this offer of adventure. He wants in on this, for his own reasons, of course. Where there's invention, there's probably gold, and this Ozymandias fellow, to him, sounds like a good mark. The other PCs drift over. Some of them are joking and happy, and Harlow is just interested, the half-orc, emo half-orc, is just interested in seeing what Mama has to say, because Mama's also coming closer too. They all gather around this figure in black, covered in a cowl, probably his own grave shroud. And actually, underneath the grave shroud, you can actually see that he's still got the noose around his neck. That probably killed him. It's tight. And underneath the cowl, you can just smell the death and decay coming off this man. Mama turns to Harlow, the half-orc, and she says, "Sugar, are you going to be going on this adventure too?" And Harlow says, "Yes, Mama." He's a submissive young man. And Mama knows this. He's also a sentimental young man, and Mama knows this. So she says, "Harlow, if you go along too, I've got a special favor to ask you." Harlow says, "Anything, Mama." She says, "Do you remember Goldie?" Now, a bunch of the PCs all do a roll at this point. Do they remember Goldie? Billy Two Pints gets a critical fail, and he thinks, "Oh yeah, Goldie's my girlfriend." Well, no, but, he's drunk, so that's going to be what he remembers. And Harlow doesn't remember at all. But Mama continues, and she says, "Well, Goldie was one of my girls. Now, she is not a smart woman, and I'm afraid she got captured one day out there in them there hills. I think Ozymandias has her, and I would be so grateful if you could bring back my Goldie." At this point, she's dabbing her eyes with a little flowery napkin. Lucius, the other tiefling, looks over and does a roll. Are these crocodile tears? And sure enough, he recognizes it right away. Mama is a wonderful actress, but not so wonderful as to trick him. These are certainly fake tears. Anyways, Mama turns to the rest of the group and says, "I would be ever so grateful if you rescued her from that brutish gnome." So, the PCs all decide for their own reasons that they want to do this. They want to investigate this Ozymandias character. And Mama gives them a little bit more information. She says that, in fact, Ozymandias has been trying out a new experimental stagecoach, the one that Flint mentioned. Well, he's getting some dignitaries to come aboard and try out his new stagecoach. And I just so happen to have some tickets for this experimental stagecoach. You understand, patrons here, they sometimes forget their belongings, and here's 2 tickets. So she hands it to the group of adventurers, and immediately they're snatched up. And she says, "The stagecoach is coming to town in about 30 minutes. If you're clever, you can get on that stagecoach. Oh, and let me give you one of my stagecoaches so that you can bring home Goldie. She's broken more than a few stagecoaches in her time. You'll understand when you see her." So the PCs all go outside, the adventurers, and sure enough, Mama comes around the corner bringing this stagecoach, and your typical stagecoach is like covered in canvas, made of wood, wooden wheels, maybe one horse, maybe two. But this has a team of 2 huge horses, and the entire stagecoach is made of steel. Looks an awful lot like a prison stagecoach, to be honest. It's like a cage on top of 4 wheels. And it's heavy duty. Harlow jumps on. He's going to lead the team. And Flint immediately looks out into the desert. He's even kind of like almost looking through some buildings. And he says, "He's coming." Flint somehow is able to like see through the distance. No matter how far away, he can see that Ozymandias is coming with this experimental stagecoach. And sure enough, there's a wooden platform at the end of the street that's just been built. 2 of the PCs decide that they're going to try their luck to get on. Actually, 3 of them decide to. It's Lucius, the tiefling, Anders, the halfling, who's taken one of the tickets, and Heffenveit, the drunken dwarf, has taken the other ticket. The tiefling, Lucius, is standing on the platform, despite the fact that he doesn't have a ticket, and the rest of the party, including Flint, the Revenant, all hide in nearby buildings. And the stagecoach, the steel one, is also hiding, amazingly. As they wait at the platform, they can feel a thundering. It's this strange feeling like the earth is beginning to shake. And as time passes, only a few seconds or so, pebbles begin to jump on the ground. There's a rumbling, almost like a sonic boom. And around the corner of this giant Monument Valley style rock outcropping comes the experimental stagecoach, which at this point, I might as well say it, it's a hovering train made of some gnomish miracle. It's a train that hovers. It's got 5 cars that it's trailing, not included. Its engine is one of the cars. And it comes rumbling to the wooden platform. It stops, screeches. I don't know what's screeching because there's no wheels, but it screeches. And a big whoomph of steam just hisses out of it, just covering the 3 adventurers who are standing on the platform. Now, as the steam mists off, the tiefling, Lucius, goes invisible. So there's just 2 people standing at the platform, and a giant steel door is laboriously opened, and out pops a tiny gnome. He's got a Salvador Dali sort of pointed mustache, 1 gold rim monocle. He's got greasy black slick back hair. He's wearing a pair of suspenders with white pants. He's quite big, fat for a gnome. And he's wearing a striped shirt. White and blue, I guess. He looks around and collects tickets from the 2. Doesn't recognize them, but he's not surprised about that. "Oh yes, come on in, all aboard, all aboard." And while he smokes a cigarette on the platform, his cigarette, somehow, sleight of hand, suddenly flicks out of his hand. The tiefling, Lucius, has flicked it out of his hand, and while he's retrieving the cigarette from the bone-dry wooden platform, Lucius slips in. The PCs who enter are aghast to find that this car that they've entered is a garden car. The entire inner car is humid and wet. There are plants growing all over the inside of this car, and there's already several passengers inside the car. It's very hoity-toity fashionable, and Lucius sidles up to one of these other passengers in the car. The passenger that he approaches is a young woman who's staring aghast at this butterfly that's landing on her. The car is full of butterflies and little birds, and this woman seems to be very young, and behind her is a scowling, unibrowed, brutish-looking woman who can only be her chaperone or her entourage. Lucius, charming as ever, smiles at her and says, "My dear, I've seen many beauties, but never as beautiful as you." He's also got a Georgian accent. This woman, Lady Sybil, is totally charmed. And he says, "May we take a stroll, you and I, together, alone?" And Lady Sybil immediately looks at her entourage, her chaperone, Helga, who says, "I don't think that's a good idea, mistress." But Lady Sybil does a little charisma roll, and so does, of course, Lucius, and he manages to extract her from her entourage, her chaperone, who just remains scowling, arms crossed, watching as Lucius just takes her down into a part of the car where nobody else seems to be around. He blows some sleep powder into her face, and poor Lady Sybil faints. And he looks into her purse and extracts 2 items. One, a ticket, and the second is what could only be described as a lady pistol from her purse. And he puts that into his cleavage because all of a sudden, Lucius looks like Lady Sybil. He's used alter shape, which in fancy D&D speak means he's just basically become her. He lays her down gently and returns to Helga. Now, if you're anything like me, as a DM, you know that alter shape does not alter voice, unfortunately. So Lucius, now Lady Sybil, says, "I feel like I've got a cold. I feel like I need to sit down." He's not doing a great job of doing Lady Sybil, but Helga is immediately concerned and says, "Oh, of course, lady. Let us go sit down in our chairs." So they move up the carts, Lucius and Helga, and emerge into a typical passenger car where Ozymandias has returned to and is setting up for a presentation on the train. He's obviously trying to sell it to prospective investors. So he's doing a presentation, and there's several other people there, other dignitaries, who either have money from banking or own settlements or gold prospecting. They all look pretty wealthy, pretty well-to-do, all different races. In the meantime, the PCs who have stayed out, including the Revenant, Flint, Billy Two Pints, the Preacher, and Harlow, decide that the best idea is actually to board the top of the train. Classic train heist move, like that. And they decide to clamber on, except for Harlow, who's actually going to take the steel stagecoach and travel behind the train. So the Preacher, Flint, and Billy Two Pint climb on top just before the train moves out of the platform and begins to travel deep into the desert. So now the caper is truly afoot. What I think I'll do now is end this video here. If you guys are interested in hearing the rest of the story, especially the climax and the epilogue, which is coming up next, give me a shout in the comments. It might be worth your time. It gets pretty silly, gets pretty hairy, as you can imagine. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's definitely an experiment. Thank you so much for listening. And maybe you'll hear the rest of the story later.